Hi Blood Bowl fans, King Ghidra here, and welcome to today's video in which we're going to be primarily taking a look back at the video that I made right at the end of 2020 after Blood Bowl second season came out, where we attempted to predict the Blood Bowl 2021 tournament meta. Now, for various reasons, 2021 didn't quite shake out to be the year that we thought it would from a tournament perspective, but nevertheless there's been a hell of a lot of Blood Bowl played in the period between that video and now, so I think this is a really good opportunity to go back and take a look at some of the things that we thought might happen in the world of Blood Bowl, the teams that we thought might be strong and the meta that would develop as a result, and see whether those expectations were correct or not. And in the second part of the video, we're also going to be taking a look at the year ahead in Blood Bowl, the 2022 meta. We have 3 huge UK tournaments coming up over the next couple of months, which I'm going to be attending all of them. I'm very excited for that, starting with the Water Bowl in Stockport this very weekend. And I think these are going to be really interesting in terms of the rule sets that we're seeing for these tournaments. And I think they will give a really strong indication of what a 2022 meta is going to look like in Blood Bowl, and I'm going to attempt to make some predictions about what I think that might be myself. So let's just jump right on in. So before we get into looking at some of the numbers and the talking points from the meta, there's probably some caveats to bring out, and obviously the first one is that 2021 was of course a massively COVID hit year, and what that meant of course is that many of the big tournaments either didn't go ahead, or we had reduced numbers at tournaments. A lot of tournaments were scaled back. Obviously a lot of people weren't able to travel for tournaments, and clearly this had an impact on what the tournament meta actually looked like versus what we might have typically expected in a normal year. And obviously what that means to a certain extent is we have to take some of the stats with a little bit of a pinch of salt. We have quite low numbers for some of the teams that we have stats for, which obviously means the confidence we can have in those, the win rates and success rates and what have you is a little bit reduced. At the same time, because there's been a lot of Blood Bowl going on in league play, for example, as well as in tournament play, and we know that, for example, Games Workshop has been taking a look at that whole gamut of Blood Bowl that's being played around the world, and has been making adjustments. So again, we have had some facts in that period since my original video was made. We've had some changes to things like the tiers that races are supposed to be playing in, or Games Workshop's expectation of how good those are. We've obviously had some nerfs, some rule clarifications. We've had a whole bunch of changes during that period, and I think it would be fair to say that for many people, many organizations and metas around the world, the game of Blood Bowl is still very much a game that's in the exploration phase. We have not solved some of the big questions about the value of rerolls now, for example, with multi reroll, or random skills, things like that. And we have some huge elephants in the room, and certainly one that I'm really tired of talking about, which is stars, but there's absolutely no avoiding it. And one of the problems we have, again, when looking at the data that's available to us from the NAF, for example, is that there's no actual way of differentiating between tournaments that had unfettered star access, or those that, as we're seeing increasingly commonly, and we will see in the tournaments that I was talking about at the top of the video, where stars are, for example, only available to stunty teams. Now, clearly this is a big deal because, the likes of, say, a Chaos Dwarf team with Hack Phlegm is a very, very different prospect to a Stunty team playing with a star, which may still be very good, by the way, and it's certainly something that we'll look at later in the video. But it just means that across all of the data and the discussion points that we're going to look at today, there is quite a lot of uncertainty and a difficulty with maybe having complete confidence in the data that we're looking at. So I think it's a really important point just to bring out, and I do absolutely want to re-emphasize that I do think that Blood Bowl right now, the meta is a million miles away from being settled. There's very much still a lot of exploration, experimentation going on, and people trying to get a feel for what is going to be good, while at the same time tournaments and tournament organisers are revising their rule packs and changing those to meet things that they think are happening in the meta. So there's a huge amount of change and a very dynamic situation right now, which is absolutely worth bearing in mind when you're trying to understand what the Blood Bowl meta is right now. So we'll start with a team which is at the very epicenter of all of those kinds of discussion points that I just talked about, and that is Underworld. Now Underworld are fascinating in terms of the NAF data that's available, because their win rate is absolutely insane compared to everybody else in the meta. I think they had an above 60% win rate across 2021, and they were many percentage points clear of the very next team. Now I think there were two very obvious reasons why that was the case, and in fact these were things that we were indeed aware of when I did my original predictions video. I think we did put Underworld in the A tier, and I think at that time really all I'd had to go on was a little bit of speculation about some of the rules that favoured them, and also a little bit of playtest experience where I'd certainly seen the power of swarming for myself, and we'd started to think that this might be quite a force. Now clearly we didn't even come close to understanding exactly how huge it was going to be, and of course again what's happened as a result of that is that Games Workshop have actually taken a look at it and have changed the swarming rules to affect Underworld so that it won't yield as many additional players for them as it will for Snotling, the full Snotling team. And very clearly that was a response to the data that was coming out of tournament and league play, where Underworld were just smashing it all over the place. At the same time, of course, Underworld were a team that could benefit from star players. They have a couple of really good ones available to them quite cheaply, Glart being one, Hackflem being the other. And you know, this was also no doubt a contributing factor to them having such a high success rate. But I have to say the stats are so mind-blowing that you know, you just wonder, like, fundamentally how good are Underworld in the BB20 configuration, which again was mostly an untested or unseen team with its changed build with the one gutter runner versus the old two blitzer, two thrower roster that they had available to them. So you know, what we've got with Underworld right now is they've taken a nerf, an explicit nerf with the swarming nerf. They have seen some changes to the cost of Hackflem in the fact that Games Workshop put out. Everyone's aware that they're one of the kind of tournament boogeyman, and you know, we'll see how 2022 shapes up for Underworld with those slight changes to some of the powerful tricks that they have available to them. Is that just going to absolutely wipe out their win rate? I don't know. I strongly suspect it's not the case. I think that although swarming was extremely impactful, I think probably Underworld have actually quite a lot of good stuff going on, and the gutter, just having the gutter runner available, it's really transformed what that team can be about. And I think you know, certainly I was one of those people that looked at them and said, well, you know, they're still fielding half a team of goblins, of stunties, and that's just not sustainable at the top level of Blood Bowl. And it might well be the case that I'm completely wrong on that front. So very interested to see what happens with Underworld in 2022, because they were kind of, everything about Blood Bowl seems to be related to Underworld in 2021. So I think they're probably the most important team to look at going into 2022. And another team that generated a really significant amount of debate in 2021 was Vampires. And again, of course, Vampires were a roster that had some significant changes in BB20, and certainly I, like many people, thought that they were changes that were very bad for Vampires, and I certainly speak here as a Vampire player and someone that loves Vampires. I think they're a really, really interesting team, one of the most interesting mechanical teams in Blood Bowl. But I felt, certainly like a lot of people, that the change from Bloodlust to Animal Savagery was really going to kill the team, kill a lot of its play style, which really didn't revolve around basing up other teams, and certainly not damaging your own players or potentially damaging your own players. And then what of course happened was that a number of individuals had some success in certainly in UK tournaments that I'm aware of, and it really reignited the debate about whether people had been wrong about the Bloodlust Animal Savagery change for Vamps. And, you know, was the fact, for example, that they now had a 2-up hypnotic gaze just completely overshadowed all of that other stuff, and actually meant that regardless they were really, really good. And I think what came out of that debate after the dust had settled and a few more tournaments had been played was that the Vamps did seem to kind of regress back to the mean, or maybe back to a level of expectation that people had about what their performance was going to be. But I do think that there was a lot of learning about their potential power level, and certainly their potential if they get anything resembling a favourable rule set, for example containing anything like skill stacking, which is absolutely brilliant for Vamps, and it always has been, in fairness, or anything that just increases their durability and their ability to play the kind of game that they want to play. So I think that's an important thing to bear in mind for Vamps. So I think when Vamps can find a favourable rule set, they can absolutely be a terror in the meta. Secondly, the 2-up Hypnogaze absolutely does allow them to perform some very kind of swingy, tactical, positional breaking moves in any given turn. And I strongly suspect that Vamps are going to remain in that category that they always have been, which is that in the hands of very strong players, they're capable of producing results that that maybe they wouldn't be in the hands of regular players. They're a very, very technical team, people that can exploit them and exploit positions and see the pitch in a slightly different way, with the potential of Hypnogaze to break positions open. I do think Vamps are probably better than I originally thought in that respect, and that's a great thing. I'm very excited about that because I love them. So definitely another good one to keep an eye on for 2022. So we touched on it a little bit already, but it's worth talking about the performance of the stunty teams in the meta so far. And by way of comparison, the 3 stunty teams, ogres, goblins and halflings, all used to run at a win percentage in the 30s, somewhere between the low 30s to the mid 30s. For the most part, and right now in BB20 they are ogres and halflings are running in the mid 40s in terms of their winning percentage. Goblins strangely are still down in the low 30s. Now, the obvious explanation for this level of performance is star players, of course, because halflings and ogres particularly are capable of taking advantage of some of the best stars, and goblins have a little bit more difficulty in exploiting that. Also, I would say goblins took a little bit of a hit in terms of things like Doom Diver getting a nerf in BB20 as well. And of course we now have to add Snotlings to the mix, and Snotlings again are up in that mid, I think maybe even high 40% win rate. So that is really uncharted territory for stunty teams, and as I say, I believe it is strongly likely to be linked to use of star players. The interesting thing will be, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the video, is that probably that they are going to continue to be allowed to see star player support or star player availability in tournament play through 2022. So whether their win rates will actually take any kind of hit, or whether they'll continue to be this slightly stronger force than they ever have been, remains to be seen. I think one of the interesting consequences of that, and I'm certainly making the assumption that there's a link here, is dwarven use rate or play rate has absolutely shot up in that same period that stunties, and particularly stunties with stars, have become a known force in the meta. I think right now dwarves are the most played race in BB20 meta, and certainly anecdotally I'm aware that a lot of people have looked to dwarves as a way to counter some of the expected stunty and star player builds that people have been bringing to tournaments. So again, this is a really good example of the way that the Blood Bowl meta has shifted, and is likely to continue to shift as people see changes in the kind of things that turn up at tournaments, and look to counter those same expected things. So whether we'll see this same whether we'll see these same win rates and usage rates of these teams play out is definitely an interesting thing to keep an eye on through 2022. So another team which is something of an outlier in the stats that we have available from NAF Games is High Elves, and this is a particularly strange one because certainly I'm not aware of any particular change in either the roster or in the Blood Bowl 20 rules that you could say has significantly changed anything about High Elves that hasn't also changed one of the other similar elf teams. I think if you look at something like Pro Elves, then obviously the armor is slightly less, but by and large there are many similarities between Pro Elves and High Elves. In fact, High Elves have generally probably been slightly worse than them, and those other elf teams have not seen fantastic results. So High Elves have, I think right now, maybe the second best win rate according to NAF stats from 2021, and as I say, I'm not aware of any particular reason why they should. They do have quite a low number of games played compared to many of the other races on the list, so I'm choosing to believe at this point in time that this is actually simply an issue with a low volume of data, and that we will again see some kind of regression to the mean as more and more people play High Elves. And in fairness, High Elves have never been one of the most popular teams in Blood Bowl. So they've always perhaps been prone to some slightly skewed statistical data. But I think the key thing is I'm not aware of any reason why High Elves should continue to perform at a high level, so my expectation is that it isn't going to. And I think it's worth talking a little bit about Elves in general, because we knew Elves were going to take a hit as a result of the BB20 rules. The passing change absolutely made life a lot more difficult for them in a number of in-game tactical situations, and they also got some other kind of subtle stealth nerves. For example, Wood Elves, losing sprint on the catches and taking some points, hikes and things like that. The strange one, I think, is that Dark Elves, to my mind, didn't take any kind of hit whatsoever, and Dark Elves are currently sitting at a very average win rate. I think they're almost at precisely 50% win rate over 2021, and they appear to be slightly underperforming for a nominal tier 1 team. And again, from my predictions, I thought that they were going to be absolutely one of the teams to beat. Now, again, as we know, Star Bowl has dominated a lot of tournament play that did take place in this period, so it's very hard to say at this point whether we'll start to see some of the typical expected tier 1 teams start to rise up as the impact of teams that were dependent on certain kinds of tournament rule sets and game rules and stars and what have you, perhaps are reined in a little bit over the year to come. But I think it'll be a really interesting thing to see whether the elf teams really have taken the hit that it looks like they have taken based on the stats that we've got available to us at the moment. Another team which has got quite an interesting deviation from its expected performance is Blackhawks. Now, per the NAF data, Blackhawks are actually the second lowest performing team in the whole meta, which is obviously surprising, not least because you expect the stunty teams to generally fill out those bottom areas. But of course, as per earlier conversation on this video, we know that many of those stunty teams have been playing the star game very successfully, and so what that leaves, I think, is a number of teams who are being punished or who are falling foul of that, and Blackhawks appear to fall into that category. But actually, the degree of their lack of performance is so great that it really makes you question if there are some kind of fundamental flaws with the roster at a tournament level. I don't personally see them. I don't know what that could be. To me, it looks like a pretty solid roster. I think it's absolutely a mid-lower tier roster, but I can't quite figure out why they're doing so badly as they seem to be. So it will be another interesting one to keep an eye on as we see more tournaments played with higher numbers of games, with less stars involved, and see if they pick up. But they were not a low played race in terms of the number of games. So right now the evidence suggests that maybe that they are more struggling than we might have imagined them to be, but one to keep an eye on. So as I mentioned at the top of the video, looking ahead to 2022, we have some big tournaments coming up in the UK, and not least because these are all 6-game tournaments, so the kind of tournaments that didn't occur last year for COVID reasons, and even the year before as well, and also because they are starting to implement some of the rules and rule sets that we might expect to see more of based on people's experience of the Blood Bowl 20 meta so far. So in the case of Water Bowl this weekend and the NAF Championship, both of these tournaments are running untiered. The same stat and upgrade packages and skill packages are available to all teams regardless of tier, and I think this is quite a big deal, and also this is probably a reflection of the fact that as I said earlier, we're still in the exploration and experimentation phase as far as the meta is concerned, because there was a lot of talk when BB20 was on its way. People were saying, oh well, I hope that tournaments you know, let the game play out. Let's find out who the good teams are. Let's not stick to the established tiers, despite somewhat ironically the fact that it is precisely in this edition that Games Workshop have kind of accepted the concept of tiers and brought them into the Blood Bowl framework. But people have said, and I absolutely sympathise with this, that let's see who's good, because there have been so many changes. We can't necessarily assume that teams belong in the same tiers that they used to belong in, and very obviously, as per some of the things that we've already looked at in this video, that is true, because we have seen some teams have very different win rates based on the rule sets that are available to them and some of the changes that have occurred in this release. So that I think is one of the first really big deals about these upcoming tournaments, and of course this really will give a chance for us to see who is shaking out in an untiered meta as the kind of quality teams that are out there. For UKTC, they are using a fairly traditional tiering system, their own one, which is quite granular. It goes to 6 tiers and looks, yeah, quite similar to a traditional rules pack that you might see in a tournament. The other big thing that all of these tournaments have going on is in terms of the availability of stars. And again, NAF Champs and Water Bowl are following a similar process where stars are only available to stunty teams, and UKTC has banned stars altogether for anyone. Now again, obviously very significant decisions, very much, I'm sure, a reaction to what we've seen in terms of the influence of stars on the meta so far. Clearly that takes out of the equation the kind of teams that we talked about earlier, for example something like Chaos Dwarves with Hackflem, which, you know, seems like a kind of abusive min-max kind of team to begin with. But it will be interesting to see how influential the Stunties are, with still having access to some of the very, very powerful star players like Griff and Zerg and Morg in particular, maybe with the Mighty Blow +2, because I think if you look at win rates and if you look at some of the teams that have been doing well in the meta, and we've already touched on this to a certain extent, you know, teams like some halflings with Morg do appear to still be a credible threat in the Blood Bowl meta, and we'll have a chance at these tournaments to see how people get on if they bring those kinds of builds. So another new thing that we have to take into consideration in 2022 is that we have a new team available in the Blood Bowl meta now, and that is the Khorne team. I think this is a really interesting looking team. It's to my mind effectively a hybrid of Norse and the old Chaos Chosen team. I think it has great tournament potential. Norse certainly are a very strong tournament team already, and I think that the Khorne team has some of the same potential strengths of it in terms of having a big guy that's a little bit like a Yeti. It has 4 effectively Ulf-Werners in terms of these strength 4 blockers with Frenzy, and I think when you put tournament builds together for Khorne, you can make some quite bashy lineups that actually have a little bit more resilience maybe than the Norse roster would. So I think they are very interesting. I suspect they're not going to be either as good as Norse or as bad as the old Khorne roster, but I think they will find a place solidly in the middle of the pack as far as tiers are concerned. So I'm going to wrap this video up by leaving you with a new version of the Blood Bowl tier list that I presented in the last video, designed to look ahead to what we think might happen in 2022. And the only caveat I would add to this tier list is that it's been constructed on the basis that we will continue to see tournaments run with stars only being available to stunty teams. Other than that, I leave the tier list for your delectation and perusal, and I'm very interested to hear your thoughts and inevitable disagreements with my opinions on what we can expect from the 2022 Blood Bowl tournament meta. Thanks for watching. It's been a pleasure. See you soon.